I spent months planning the perfect trip to Japan for my dad's 60th birthday flights. Hotels, private tours, everything. It cost me $9,400 in every ounce of my love. But one text shattered it all. We gave your spot to Kevin's girlfriend. She's more fun. I just stared at my phone, typed 2 words back, got it. That night, I began planning something else, not a vacation, but retribution. Before I tell you how I turned my family's dream trip into their worst nightmare, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. This is her Retaliation, and I'm Freya. They say family always comes first. But what if your family treats you like the last resort, the boring one, the quiet one, the one who pays but doesn't belong? That's what I was to them. I was the responsible daughter, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, handled everyone's chaos, and smiled even when I was hurting. My brother Kevin, he was the golden boy, loud, charming, and perpetually broke. But he could do no wrong. So when Dad's 60th was coming up, I decided to make it special. He'd always dreamed of going to Japan, cherry blossoms, temples, sushi trains. He used to tell me stories about Tokyo in the 80s when he was stationed nearby with the Navy. So I did it. I worked overtime, saved for months, and booked everything. Business, class flights for 6 people, a suite in Kyoto overlooking the Kamo River, a private tea ceremony, and a guided MT. Fuji day trip, every detail screamed love and thoughtfulness. I even made customized luggage tags, the Smith family Japan adventure. When I sent them photos of the itinerary, Mom texted, "This looks amazing, honey." Kevin replied with a thumbs up emoji. Typical, I didn't care. I just wanted Dad to feel loved. 3 weeks before the trip, I texted the family group chat. Everyone ready for Japan. Don't forget your passports. That's when Kevin's girlfriend, Mandy, chimed in. Mandy, Onji, Japan. I've always wanted to go. Me, yeah. It's for Dad's birthday, family trip. Mandy, awa, that's so sweet. I didn't think much of it. She'd only been around for 6 months. She was bubbly, fake, nice, and obsessed with TikTok filters. But then 3 days later, the text came. Mom, hey Freya, slight change of plans. We gave your spot to Kevin's girlfriend. She's more fun. I read it 3 times. We gave your spot to Kevin's girlfriend. No apology, no explanation, just a statement. I typed 1 word, got it. Then I put my phone down, and in that silence, something inside me clicked. They thought I'd cry, beg, or argue, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled a quiet, terrifying smile and opened my laptop. Because everything for that trip, the flights, the hotel bookings, the transfers was in my name. Every confirmation, every reservation, every cent mine. They didn't even know I'd used my personal email for everything. I had all the control. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the glowing screen. The hotel confirmation page blinked back at me. Kyoto Kawa Suite 6 guests, check-in March 12. My finger hovered over the cancel reservation, a button, and I whispered, you think Mandy's more fun. Let's see how much fun you have when your flights disappear. Click. The hotel gone, then I opened the airline portal. 6 business class tickets, $9,400 total. Refund available to the original payment method, mine. Click, flights canceled. Refund initiated, and just like that, the family vacation vanished. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. A week later, Mom texted again. Just checking, everything's set for Japan. We're so excited. I replied, everything's been handled. Handled indeed. When the departure day arrived, I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the morning news. By noon, my phone started buzzing. Mom, Freya, why aren't we checked in? The airline says there are no tickets. Kevin, what the hell did you do? Dad, Freya, call me immediately. I just put my phone on silent and smiled. At 2:00 p.m., I got one last message from Mom. We're not going anywhere. Everything's canceled. You've ruined everything. Ruined, no, I thought. I'd only just begun. For days, they bombarded me with calls. I ignored every single one. Then the real fun began. When they got back home, tired and furious from their non-existent trip, they found the locks on the house changed. Because here's what they didn't know. I owned that house. Years ago, when Dad retired, he transferred it to me for tax reasons. They've been paying rent to me ever since, so I updated the lease. The new rent, triple late payment penalty, immediate lockout, and I enforced every clause. The next morning, Kevin texted, furious. "You can't do this, we're family. Mandy's crying." Oh, poor Mandy. The fun won. I replied, "Family doesn't kick you out of their dreams for someone temporary. Enjoy your new reality." Then I called the bank, the same bank that handled their joint account. Guess who had co-signer privileges on Dad's credit cards? Me. I froze every card. Later that day, I got one final text. "Our cards aren't working. We're at the coffee shop and they got declined." I sent back a single emoji, but this isn't where it ends. Because revenge isn't just about payback. It's about balance, and I wasn't done teaching them what that word meant. They came at me with noise shouts through the door, desperate banging, my mother's thin, cracked voice begging like she had never begged before. My voicemail filled up with messages, apologies, threats, bargains. The catalog of their panic was almost beautiful. I could feel the moment like a pulse. This was the point where most people would cave. Where they'd promise the moon, ask for forgiveness, lay out jewelry and casseroles, and pretend to suffer. Not me, not for something this naked. I slept well that night. The next morning I walked past the front door they weren't allowed to unlock. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and made a list. Revenge, I had learned, was not a single act, it was an ecosystem. It needed maintenance, escalation, and moments that drilled the lesson in until it became unavoidable. First, logistics. I wasn't interested in destroying them. I wanted to rearrange the world so they felt the consequences of casual cruelty. I began with the lease. The new agreement I'd prepared wasn't a, "Hey, pay more or leave," a note scrawled in anger. It was a lawyer-reviewed amendment, stapled and formal, delivered with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't invite debate. Triple the rent, immediate penalties, a clause for breach of conduct. I'd given them 2 weeks to negotiate, a paper kindness that was a trap. 2 weeks is enough to panic, not enough to save. Then, because access to money is a language everyone understands, I tightened the financial screws. I didn't invent bank freezes out of spite and a panic. I used the co-signer privileges Dad had given me years ago during a well-intentioned but naive financial consolidation. Why had he signed? Trust. He trusted his children. He trusted me. They'd abused that trust. Freezing the cards had been easy. Harsher was the slow, rolling withdrawal of conveniences they treated as rights. I redirected the utilities to my account so any missed rent would trigger cutoff notices. I paused the internet service with the provider as soon as a late fee posted. I didn't cut power, I'm not a monster, but I let the small comforts erode. They called me again, hysterical, pleading. Kevin's voice had a brittle edge I'd never heard before. "Freya, please, we'll pay anything. Mandy will pay her parents. I'll sell my stuff." He sounded small. I kept the line deliberately formal. I sent the amendment. I said, "Sign and pay the first month plus penalty by the end of day. After that, we can talk." "You can't. Dad will." He trailed off. The fury bled into pleading like old paint leaking down a wall. I hung up. Second, reputation. People treat the same family differently when they know the truth. I had a history folder, a digital folder of things that explained why I'd acted the way I did. Not blackmail, not trashing, but context. I documented the emails where Mom had asked me to front rent, and then told other relatives I'd paid for everything. I'd saved messages where Kevin promised to reimburse me and then issued the same empty boyfriend emojis he always used. I had a record of Dad's alimony promise to Kevin that never materialized. Most of it was embarrassing, not criminal, enough to make them have to explain themselves. I started where it would hurt the most, their pride. I didn't post anything publicly, this wasn't a soapbox ploy, but I let close family friends know the new lease terms as if they were simple, unavoidable facts. People who mattered began to ask questions. Invitations started to stop arriving, the family's outer image pristine golden. Boy Kevin at center developed a slow hairline crack. Third, small, humiliating encounters. I timed them like clockwork. On the third day, Mom walked into the coffee shop where I sometimes took work calls. She stood there in a windbreaker that used to be hers, eyes rimmed red from crying, clutching a paper copy of the lease like it might be a map out. She caught sight of me and froze. Our eyes met. I nodded like a stranger because she'd acted like a stranger. She blurted, "Freya, please." The barista looked uncertain. I'd already spoken to him 2 nights before and explained the situation in measured tones. He wouldn't refuse her coffee, we aren't monsters, but the way his smile faltered when their card got declined was a private, surgical thing I enjoyed. Kevin's face as their transaction failed, embarrassed, then angry, replayed in my head like a loop. "Maybe your bank needs to sort it out," the barista said, nervous. Kevin's friend stared. Someone muttered about responsibility. Humiliation isn't pretty, it's granular. It accumulates. Declined card here, a curt nod there, a growing distance at church coffee mornings. Their comfortable social currency, the one they'd spent believing was inexhaustible, began to lose its value. They tried to bargain. Kevin offered to work odd jobs. Mom sent a letter of apology that read like a foreign language, polite phrases with no ownership. Dad left a voicemail where his voice cracked in a way that made me swallow hard. He asked to meet. He said he was proud of the trip. He thanked me in the past tense for planning it. He sounded hollow. I considered the meeting, then refused. Why would I give them a stage to perform repentance on? If they wanted mercy, they would have to earn it past the point of easy performance. Instead, I took the emotional route, reminders. Not public shaming, not threats, but gestures that made it impossible for them to forget the act. On day 4, I mailed everyone involved a small token, the luggage tag set I'd ordered months ago. Leather, embossed with Smith Family Japan Adventure. Each tag had a note inside in my handwriting, to those who RSVP'd and then walked away. The note read, "Travel is a gift, so is gratitude." The tags arrived on different days. The timing mattered. A tag in the mail is a small, triumphant thing. It is a physical reminder of what was taken. My mother cried when hers arrived. Kevin tossed his onto a table and stared at it like it was an accusation. From the outside, my actions looked vindictive. From the inside, to me, they were corrective. They had believed money could replace honor, that appearances could bury accountability. I was creating a new ledger line by line, but of course, revenge isn't just ledger work. People change when their entire scaffolding shifts. I wanted to accelerate that shift, so I turned to secrets not to torture, but to untether. I knew, from having been in the messy center of our family for years, that Kevin had borrowed from a small business account months before and then lied about it. It wasn't massive, it was sloppy and young. He expected me to cover for him as I always had. This time I didn't. I sat down at my desk with a file of evidence, spreadsheets, a copy of a canceled check, a string of texts where Kevin promised reimbursement. I drafted a letter. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't extortion. It was a choice. Either he made the debt right, with a formal repayment schedule signed and notarized, or the small business owner who trusted him would find out. The letter was professional. The implication carried itself. I sent it to Kevin via registered mail. He called. He screamed. He begged. He accused me of ruining everything. I let him swing. The truth, when carried calmly, is a kind of blade. It cuts through excuses, and it doesn't need dramatics. By the end of week 1, they were living a compressed version of the life they'd once taken for granted. Invitations dwindled. Mom stopped hosting her usual Sunday lunches. People whispered about strain, obligation, and what it meant to beat the family with problems. Kevin was sleeping on a couch at a friend's place. Dad came by looking like a man who had misplaced his map. His pride was gone in a way I couldn't unsee. I took a breath. I could have stopped. I could have let them plead and promise and sign and move on. The law and the ledger would have caught up with them, and life would have corrected itself. But I wanted something else, a reckoning that taught them the cost of assuming someone's labor, emotional and financial, is inexhaustible. So I planned one final, precise act, not destructive, but clarifying. I arranged a birthday breakfast for Dad, not the big trip, not the international fanfare he'd imagined. A small gathering with only those who had shown up when things were easy. I invited a handful of close family friends, the ones who mattered. I prepared it meticulously. Dad's favorite pancakes, a playlist of the songs he hummed in the garage, a bouquet of flowers arranged just the way he liked them. I called them all a week in advance. I told them it would be a low-key morning to celebrate 60 years of stubborn kindness. For Dad, it was perfect, or so I thought. He deserved beauty even if the world had shifted under his feet. They arrived folding into the kitchen like sheep. Mom's eyes were tired. Kevin tried to force a smile. Mandy sat at the edge of the table, checking her phone, unaware of the currents she'd been thrown into. I watched Dad's face as he took his first bite. He closed his eyes. He looked small. The enormity of what he'd lost, not material things, but the untroubled respect of the people he loved, settled over him like a shadow. I let the silence stretch, then I pulled the luggage tags from a drawer and placed one at the center of the table. For the trip that wasn't, I said softly. Dad's fork froze. He looked at me like someone seeing a stranger in a mirror. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Why, Freya? He wanted the story in a neat, comforting outline. He wanted it to be fixable with apologies and promises. But I had given him room for closure, and he'd chosen not to take it. He'd gambled on appearances and lost. Because you gave my place away to someone you barely know, I said. Because I paid for something you treated like a prop. Because gratitude and respect were the only things I asked for, and you traded them for a laugh. Dad's shoulders slumped. He didn't argue. He looked relieved and ashamed at once, like a man who'd been woken by a cold hand. The room was full of people who had benefited from the life I'd built, and who had assumed my labor was inexhaustible. Now in the small private room there were no witnesses to bail them out, only pancakes and a quiet, inexorable truth. But I'm still your daughter, I said, and I still love you, but I won't let you treat me like I'm invisible. There it was, the seam I wanted them to find. Love, yes, but respect conditional on reciprocity. They left after coffee. Kevin tried to hug me. I stepped aside. Mandy waved and mouthed some platitude I didn't hear. Dad lingered a moment, then said, I'm sorry. It was thin, but it was a start. When I closed the door, I felt an odd, clean fatigue. Revenge had been procedural, not spiteful. The point was not to revel forever. It was to create a reality where thoughtlessness had consequence. But even as I rationalized, I knew there would be backlash. They would try to rally allies, they would make statements, they would promise to make it right. And some friends would take their side. That was inevitable. What I hadn't expected was something smaller and stranger, a late-night text from Dad hours after the day had cooled. Freya, I'm proud of the pancakes. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the message and felt something thin and human knot itself in my chest. For a moment I almost wrote back with an immediate forgiving spur. Then I typed, "We'll talk when the rent is paid and Kevin has a plan in writing. Until then rest." It was businesslike. It kept the terms. It kept them accountable. It also left the door open out wide but not bolted. And the truth was, I wanted him back in a way that wasn't about the trip or the money. I wanted the family to be something more than a set of relationships that could be turned off. But that required change. It required them to stop taking me for granted. Revenge had taught me that the only person who would guarantee that change was me. So I waited, not in a vengeful, festering way, but as someone watching a slow machine adjust to new gears. When people are forced to reckon, the smallest edges can become sharp. I planned to stay steady at the fulcrum. There were more moves to make legal papers, conversations that needed to be recorded, even an email to a few relatives to clarify the truth of what happened and why. But those belong to the next chapter. For now, I let the house hum. I let the coffee cool. I let the luggage tags lie like quiet accusations on the kitchen table. Because revenge, properly done, isn't about letting pain consume you. It's about making sure the people who used you know exactly what they did and giving them the chance to be better, if they dare. After the birthday breakfast, things slowed into a new rhythm, one where every knock at the door had an edge and every caller was measured. They made plans in the shadow of penalties. Kevin drafted a repayment plan and sent it the next day. Mom called to say she'd ask her sister for a loan. Dad tried to figure out what to do with the mortgage. They talked about making reparations like it was a shopping list. But I'd learned long ago that promises made under pressure often dissolve once the heat is off. So I moved beyond the theater of panic to the mechanics of permanence. First, I made everything enforceable. The lease amendment I'd given them was real, and I filed a formal notice with the property registry office. That meant if they delayed payments beyond the short grace period, I could lawfully begin eviction proceedings. The change wasn't cruel, it was a legal recalibration of obligations that had always been blurred. I hired a local attorney to draft a clear repayment contract for Kevin's business debt and a binding installment plan for the rent arrears. No loose promises, no "I'll pay next month" texts, signatures, witnesses, notarization. When Kevin balked at the lawyer fees, I paid them myself an odd indulgence and invoiced him. I wanted payment that left a paper trail, so later denials would be impossible. Next, I sealed the financial locks. Dad's banking arrangements were cleaned up. I worked with the bank to revise signatory privileges so the family's accounts had clear limits and transparent alerts. No more informal cosigner arrangements hiding in the background where anyone could draw money without accountability. It required patience, calls, and meetings, the kind of administrative brutality I'd been avoiding my whole life. But it was effective. The new structure made it hard for Kevin to make impulsive withdrawals or for Mom to assume lines of credit without oversight. Then I handled the softer currency, apologies and reputation. I didn't want to humiliate for the sake of humiliation. I wanted them to be welcomed back only when change had meaning. So I drafted a public letter not accusatory, but honest that I emailed to extended family and a curated list of close friends. It read like this: a brief recount of the trip, the facts of the cancellation, and a clear statement that I had acted to protect myself after repeated disregard. I avoided melodrama and insults. The goal wasn't allies or enemies, it was reality. Some family members were sympathetic, others were shocked, a few were quietly supportive in private messages. That ripple mattered. It removed the comfortable silence that had excused their behavior and replaced it with scrutiny. There was resistance. Kevin attempted to rally a few relatives, portraying himself as the hurt son and me as the cold spinster who'd taken advantage. It was laughable. The paperwork spoke louder than his charm. When his friends tried to raise money for the family, he discovered that friends' good intentions don't reverse formal notices. One night, Mandy the catalyst showed up at my door, hesitant. She looked terrible. The smile that used to flicker on TikToks was gone. She carried a small, awkward bouquet that looked like she'd grabbed it between shifts. "I'm sorry," she blurted. "I didn't know. If I had—" She stumbled over the words like she'd rehearsed and discarded them. I let her finish in silence. Her apology mattered less than her presence. She was part of the mechanism that had displaced me, but she hadn't written the text message or changed the locks or signed the papers. People like her can be forgiven if they listen and change. "I appreciate that," I said, "but apologies don't repay rent or fix relationships. If you want to help, don't make decisions that hurt people you barely know." She nodded, ashamed. She left without asking me for anything. For the first time, I felt pity small and precise, and then I closed the door. The next escalation I'd planned was symbolic and practical. I reclaimed the family narratives that had been taken for granted. Memories had been monetized and belittled. I'd had enough. I created a small photo album, physical, not digital, of my father's life, with photos from his Navy days, the young man in photos at a ramen counter, faded yet present. I mailed it to him with a single note: "Memories matter. Respect them." He called softly, asking why. I told him plainly that he was welcome to more, but only if respect returned. He was quiet, then said, "I understand." The line held for a moment. There was no theatrical apology, just the slow work of someone acknowledging culpability. Legally and practically, the house became a fulcrum. I offered a realistic path. They could stay if they agreed to the new terms and made the first payment plus a security sum. I also offered alternatives: a referral list for affordable housing, help finding a roommate, even temporary support if they could demonstrate sincere change. I wasn't trying to crush them. I was intentionally strict. Mercy without conditions had been the enemy of reciprocity for too long. Kevin's first payment was late and incomplete. He blamed unexpected expenses and begged for leniency. I refused. There were consequences, and the legal process, as boring as it is, moved forward. He missed a crucial deadline, and I filed the eviction notice. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, signing the forms, watching the stamp hit the paper. The administrative sound felt like closure. Eviction is a blunter instrument than any of my other moves. It hurt me too. It meant watching the faces of people I loved, contending with apartments and boxes, and the exact, painful logistics of losing a home. But the point wasn't to expel them into destitution. It was to make their choices have weight. If they wanted to act like my generosity was a given, they needed to accept that with trust comes accountability. When the sheriff delivered the notice, Kevin cried. Not the loud, performative tears he'd used for sympathy in the past, but raw, incredulous sobs. He packed what he could and left. For a while he slept on couches, then in a rented room, working double shifts. I watched the arc of his afternoons, no longer afternoons of entitlement, but hours spent paying dues. Motherhood and care had been a language my mother had once used well. In the months that followed, she learned to balance pride and necessity. She sold a few items, asked for help where she had thrived on independence, joined a budgeting class at the community center I'd recommended, and painfully and honestly apologized publicly to a few friends for her part. The change wasn't sudden. It was iterative, measured in receipts and calendar alerts. The small, responsible acts piled up. Dad, who'd been most wounded by the loss of a dream trip, underwent perhaps the most tender transformation. He came to visit one evening, not for pancakes or grand gestures, but to sit with me while I sorted receipts. He brought a stack of old letters he'd kept from Japan, fragile and fragrant with years. We sat in silence, then he asked how I'd felt when they'd given my place away. "That night," I said, "I felt like I was invisible. I wanted my life to mean something more than their convenience. He looked at me with wet eyes. You are never invisible, he said. I lost sight of that. I am sorry. He meant it in the small way that matters a daily proof instead of a speech. He started showing up in tiny ways, calling to check on the bills, asking how he could help with the lease, trying to restore dignity rather than doctoring appearances. He wasn't perfect. He would never be faultless, but he unlearned a habit, letting charm replace empathy. Months later, not immediately, not in a triumphant montage, but in patient increments, we sat around a table that no longer required grand vacations to hold a celebration. It was quieter and, in a way, truer. Kevin had his own room in a shared apartment, working full-time and slowly sending me modest repayments. Mom managed her budget and even invited one close neighbor over for tea. Dad, frailer but steadier, taught me how to roll sushi the way he'd learned decades ago. He laughed at his mistakes and didn't ask me to fund them. I could have demanded full restitution, public recantations, or a lifetime of penance. But revenge, as I'd come to understand, was not a pursuit of perpetual punishment. It was an insistence on mutual dignity. I wanted them to be better because they had to be, not because I forced them into groveling. Change that grows under constraint can persist. On a random Tuesday afternoon, Kevin sent a short message. I'm sorry, thank you for not letting us coast on what you do. I get it now. I'm working on being someone you can rely on. It wasn't perfect prose. It didn't erase nights of humiliation, but it was accountability. And accountability, for me, was the only acceptable currency of forgiveness. In the end, the house stayed in my name. The lease remained strict but fair. We restructured family finances in ways that prevented unilateral decisions. We rebuilt a map of obligations and care. The Japan trip was never rescheduled, not because I wouldn't have taken them, but because the point had shifted. It had never been about the destination alone. It was about the respect that precedes any gift. When Dad and I sat one night and watched a grainy video of his younger self in Tokyo, a clip he'd kept in a dusty box, he turned to me and said, with a small smile, "You did what I didn't have the courage to do." I felt a complicated thing, relief, sorrow, and a cautious warmth. If revenge had been a single flame, it would have burned out. But what I crafted was more like a forge, hot, purposeful, requiring labor and tempering. It changed shapes, hardened the edges of expectations, and left behind a family that, imperfectly, had learned to value the person who'd always been the backbone. I didn't enjoy the suffering I'd watched them go through. I hated that dignity had its costs, but I would never again be the unnoticed ledger at the bottom of their lives. I had taught them through contracts, through consequence, through quiet reminders that love without respect is a paper promise. And when they finally thanked me, not with platitudes, but with steady, small acts of responsibility, I let them back into a life that had boundaries. That was my mercy, conditional, deliberate, and in its own way final.